Nice to meet you all. Okay, so onto the jungle of European financing. You have such a beautiful voice, Jean. So quickly, Jean introduced me. I spent 20 years in an investment bank. I started as an AI engineer. And I started actually in a game studio, which closed very soon after I entered it. And the desire to go back to the creative industry has been growing with me all of those years. And in those 5 recent years, I built a business unit in Société Générale to fund indie studio and mobile studios. And I decided it was time for me to leave, and that's where I joined Kurt and Erwan, who were founding Hawkswell Studio. So we are a CRPG based in Paris, almost 40, and hopefully we will reveal our game next year. Sorry for using Midjourney. I'm a banker, I'm an engineer, but I'm definitely not a drawing artist. Actually, it will be an occasion to give you a bit of content on AI, of insights on how AI works. So yeah, the jungle of financing. So lots of different actors, starting with you, the studio. Actually, this is funny because I started to use Midjourney like lots of speakers do nowadays. And I was asking, so I wanted to have a lady because we have too many men in studio. So I said, okay, draw me a lady in a jungle. So the lady was super hot. So I said, no, she's too hot. Give me just an average looking lady. So it was almost like that. And actually, I asked an ugly looking lady. So this is an ugly looking lady or average looking woman. And obviously, AI is super biased. You can see that in lots of these kind of pictures. And actually, I thought it was quite funny to have a look at that. The second actor is the investor. So this is an investor. It's necessarily a man, a 40 years old white man. They all look the same as well. Is this one nice or not? Who knows? We will see. So the investor is the guy who will provide the energy to keep your studio running until you can make it by yourself. So the jungle is actually, you have lots of constraints, and those constraints come from the market. So we need to have a look at the market before. I've had a chat this morning. We were really discussing on the video game market, and actually the video game market is really linked to the attention economy. So I think most of you know this chart. This is the number of yearly releases on Steam. This year it's even a bit higher. It's like close to 12,000. So as you can see, this is and actually this grows faster than the amount of money that comes in the game industry. The sector is growing, but the number of releases is growing faster, which means that the average revenue per game is lower. Every week, you have so close to between 200 and 250 Steam games. You have a new mobile game every 2 minutes. 50 Switch games. The discoverability on Switch store is awful. You have, I don't know, thousands of Spotify songs every minute. And YouTube, Netflix, social networks. So yeah, that's basically life that we are talking. Also, we are growing as adults. We have kids, which means that the available time is getting shorter and shorter, which means that whenever you put your game out there, you are fighting with all the other competitors. Which means that the revenue distribution on Steam is really super skewed and warped. As you can see, the huge majority of games earn less than 5K during their first year of distribution. So, and this is not sustainable, obviously, for all of those who want to get paid doing that job. So this is the market today, and you need to be able to deal with that. And I don't know if all of you heard about the word discoverability. This is becoming, there's quite a bit of research on that. With all the technical frameworks that are out there, making a game is not that difficult anymore. at least a small indie game. The main moat now to break in that sector is definitely getting your games in front of everyone, and this is the difficulty number one that you need to tackle. And why am I talking about all that? Is because this difficulty will be directly linked to the type of capital that you can mobilize at any time during the life of your company. So how do we deal with that? Water. So the investors, you have several types of investors. The venture capital. So venture capital, they get actually their fund from rich families, family office, rich companies, and they need, first of all, they need to raise funds. And why do they get those funds? They need, I mean, if you have lots of money, you need to be able to put it somewhere to generate additional money. And you have various ways to put your money. You can put money in the bank, you can invest in companies, and usually you expect a certain type of diversification of your portfolio to mitigate your risks, financial risk. And you also want to have a return. Putting your money in risky ventures is a way to get a high risk, high return. The risk is always linked to the potential return. And one of the issues that we have right now is that with the inflation, it's becoming more and more interesting to put your money back in the bank, to have cash on hand, which means that the money of the venture capital is a bit dry right now. And we are also emerging from like 5 years of very intense investment on the NFT, Web3, and now it's AI, which means that there is less money for game funding. And actually in Europe, we have very few dedicated venture capital. So how do they work? Basically, they will invest in 100 companies. They will expect 90 of them to fail. 9 of them will be just average, and 1 or 2 of them might be evaluated to 100 or even 200 or 500 multiple 10 or 15 years from now, and they will be able to resell those shares to get that multiplier. I think 2% in France, there was stats published last week, less than 2% of studios are funded by venture capital. So high risk, high return. So actually the presentation will be quite short, so you will have plenty of time to ask questions if needed. So the banker, this one looks exhausted. Maybe it's Superman, I don't know if he looks like that. So the banker is a more low risk, low reward. He wants to keep you for a long time. He will get paid with your credit card fees and by loaning you a bit of money, not too much, because usually bankers lend money only to the rich people. So bankers are good enough to kickstart just getting your office, getting your computers, but usually they won't go further than that, because their lending capacity will be proportional to the amount of cash that you can bring regularly. Which is why bankers usually start giving you money once your first game is out there. 95% of studios don't make it after their first game, which means that, they don't want to risk any kind of money like that. Also, bankers have European rules they need to follow, and actually they are capped in the amount of money that they can invest in startups. Public funding, this one looks like Adrien from Arte, friend of mine. So yeah, public funding, they have cultural objectives. They need to promote the culture, and it's also very politic, which means that it will change over time. The great news from public funding is that although they are capped in amount, they don't expect lots of return. It's not the objective. The objective is really to develop the tissue of entrepreneurs in their countries, encourage, and especially in Europe, consortium and a group of companies trying to emerge together. So public funding have their own agenda, so the instruments that they would provide are usually grants, subsidies, tax credits, and it's pretty useful. And in Europe, I think we have one of the best public funding schemes in the whole world. The publisher Dr. Mad. So the publisher usually doesn't contribute a lot to the production. They will, as we say in French, inspecteur des travaux finis. But I mean, yeah, publisher, you can view the publisher mostly as a specialized banker. They know the market very well because the banker usually doesn't know the video game market. It's too small, it's too risky. The publisher will lend you money, and they will get a revenue sharing from that money, and they can do that. It's actually it's an arbitrage because the banker will lend you money and they will expect a fixed cost. So this money is quite cheap actually in term of cost, but the publisher will lend you money and they will take a big part of your revenue. And this is an anomaly. This is why I fought for years in the bank to try to tell my fellow bankers that we could lend money to studios, because the risk, if you understand the sector better, you can take more risk, and then you get a boulevard. But today the banks are mostly not ready to take this kind of bet, and the publisher will act as specialized banker. Crowdfunding and Patreon. So this is mostly, actually this was great 5 or 10 years ago when Kickstarter emerged. Today for game is really very small. I think if you less than 5 productions a year make more than 500K on Kickstarter. So I mean that's really more of a way to put your brand out there, start to develop your own community. Actually, you should have a community before trying Kickstarter. But in any case, it's more like a marketing bit than a real funding way, unless you are a very small indie. So this is really a case by case, but definitely it's not something that can be easily replicated. In that kind of financing, I would put also the early access. Early access is, I think, close to 20% of games now on Steam go through early access. You should treat an early access like a full-fledged release, but actually it's very reliable to start building your community, engaging with them, develop. So that's what we call the community-driven development, and that is very important, especially for some investors, that you have this kind of cycle. So what is this weird animal, the hybrid? The hybrid, it means that as an indie studio, you don't have lots of choices. You need to fire from all cannons. So you need to try to mobilize all those funding depending on where you stand in the development of your company. So first, that would be the average indie financing plan. The first would be to try to build a first pile of money. That's what we call in France fonds propres. So that's usually the equity coming from the initial founders, their own money, also the time they invest in the company, and then you can start, if your business model allows it, to ping venture capital, corporate VCs, business angels. In France, in other parts of Europe, we start to have investors club with entrepreneurs from the game industry reinvesting back in smaller companies. So business angels can become interesting in the future. Public structure occasionally do some equity funding. So yeah, basically those fonds propres are super important, because you need first, if you have a game project, to convince yourself, then your initial associate, and then maybe the first stakeholders who will invest a bit in your company. This is important because the rest of the funding will have a look at that small pile of money that you created initially, and as a way that you have enough energy and convincing power to bring people on board. So this slice of pie is also very committing for the future. I'm seeing lots of studios that spend their equity. So equity are basically shares of your company. They spend their equity very freely. And unfortunately, if you give too much of your equity away, So I would say you have a couple of thresholds, 25%, 40% of your equity, and 50%. 50%, you're not the owner of the company anymore. You can get fired, and that's a shame, but that's the way it works. 40% and 25%, you lose the rights and access to public funding in Europe, in some countries. And you, if you want to bring other investors on board, it's starting to get difficult in the discussion, also maybe in the decision process. So yeah, equity is a key resource, the most long-term resource that you have. Spend it wisely. If I can give a few benchmarks, you can give, for example, 7% for the 150K for a seed funding, then probably between 500K and 2 million for less than 25% of your company. And then, I mean, it will depend on the game, the experience of the founders, but yeah, basically pay attention to the threshold of equity when you're trying to sell equity. Once you have that, you have, let's say, a kickstart for your project and your company. So you can start getting subsidies very as early as possible. Europe is excellent for subsidies, and they will actually try to scale on the initial money that you have. So public structure will do that, occasionally private, although much smaller. Epic Mega Grant is a small grant, but I mean, I don't know many indies that wouldn't like 50K from Epic. So yeah, as soon as you have you're starting in your prototype, you have first few members on board, you got an initial round, even if it's friends and family, then quickly go and have a look at subsidies. You're pushing through your prototype, pre-production, then you can start, you need to finish the funding of your, so obviously it's a first studio, the best would be to self-fund, but yeah, this is really for a first studio. So you are starting to push through your pre-production. So to get the money to finish the game, the usual suspects are the publishers and some indie funds. And if you're reaching the end of the production, you might get distribution deals. So this is a part, the funding with rev share can be seen as debt, so as a loan. One key element here would be to pay attention to the rev share agreement, because I've seen quite a bit of studios getting funding, securing funding for the end of the production, but giving too much of their revenue after. And if the game underperforms slightly, then your company will die just after releasing the game. So pay attention to the revenue sharing before the publisher recoups, and pay attention also after. Usually, I don't advise giving more than after recoup more than 60% of your revenues, depending. It will be sized on the money that you get before, and also try to secure at least 20% before recoup. Hopefully, you are selling that game, boatload of it. So money will come from consumers, distributors, additional packages such as Game Pass, etc. If you go into troubles, you can start to work for hire. That's also something that you can do before creating the company to bring an additional equity fund at your table. And honestly, the best would be to be sustainable by yourself. One of the issues that we have in Europe is that as the public schemes are very generous for indies, I'm starting to see lots of studios that are becoming quite expert at getting all that money. And unfortunately, with the number of games that we have now, having public money doesn't mean that you will make a successful game. But don't lose the focus, which is to make a great game and find your core audience and be able to sustain yourself in the future. At the end, if you go through difficult periods, debt, so through banks, and public structure will actually usually be cheaper. You can also count on guarantee, what we call loan guarantees, which means that if, let's say, you want 100K from a bank and they say, okay, I cannot go above 50K, you have several countries where you will have public structures that will guarantee the other 50K, which is a way for banks to decrease their exposure and for you to get an easier access to credit. And if the bank don't know about that, make your due diligence before and suggest it to your bank. So as you can see, hybrid funding is you will need to be able to understand those 5 main categories of instruments and leverage of them at the right moment. The main issue in trying to get the wrong side of funding at the wrong moment is that you will fail to meet the expectations of the investor. So studio want to develop the idle game and keep their IT, if I summarize a bit that. They want to keep the control, their creative control and management as long as possible, and they want to secure their long-term survival. Venture capital will want to maximize revenue by taking lots of risks. They will look for exit opportunities, so trying to sell their shares for 100 times more, let's say, within 5 to 10 years. And which is a bit stuck at the moment because with the failure of the major investors in Europe, Embracer, Stillfront, etc., the number of exit opportunities are very far in between. So I hope that with the successful sale of Activision and Microsoft, the acquisition will resume a bit faster and which should clear the air a bit with the venture capital. Also, they will have a portfolio strategy like a publisher. So if you want to pitch a venture capital, have a look at their previous deals to understand what are their strategy, because it's not always obvious if you want to have a look at their website. Public funding, my friend Adrien. They will want to support the promotion of the national culture, the creation of new IPs, and they will expect long-term ROI, but they will be very lenient in estimating that ROI. Banker, low-risk projects, recurring revenues, already rich people. Crowdfunding, Patreon. So one of the difficulties is basically if you deal with venture capital, public fund, and bankers, you are talking to, it's B2B relationship. When you start to crowdfund and provide your game in early access, you are facing your community, so it's really directly a B2C relationship, and this can be really brutal if you're not prepared for that, and if your staff is not prepared for that. So it's they are impatient, demanding. They can really steer you off your creative vision if you listen too much to their feedbacks, but you will also need to nurture that community, leveraging on your tools as an artist, emotion, and basically you want to give them the feel that they will have the best game ever. So crowdfunding, you're not really selling a game, you're selling the process of making a game and the emotions that go with it. Publisher will maximize ROI, they will look for IP opportunities, they will want to grow their portfolio. Some of them are specialized on a given genre. Others want to have a diversified portfolio. So once again, have a look at what they're looking for and pitch them accordingly. As you might know, most well-known publishers receive between 20 to 30 pitches a day, which means that you need to really make it easy for them, be as professional as possible. And probably most of the publishers out there will sign people that they have met before, which means that going to events is really super important to just establish a physical relationship. On the branding, that's interesting because publisher and studio have aligned interest. They want to make the game that sells as much as possible. But when it comes to branding, there will be a conflict of interest, and also it's a zero-sum game. The more money you give the publisher, the less you will have. So you will need to negotiate for that hard. But also, when you put your game out there, it will be, publisher will want to put their brand up front, and you will want to do the same. So there will be a bit of a fight on that side. And being stuck to the same publisher all of your life is not really interesting for you. I think I meet quite a bit of new publishers that really emphasize and encourage the studio to build their own brand, to have to nurture their own community. And I think that's really important to be able to switch publisher for the long term and not to be stuck with an actor that basically cannibalizes your brand. So European funding, a bit of focus on that. So because we are very good at that in Europe. So we have quite a bit of difficulties. First, public funding change all the time. It's exhausting. Every quarter there is a new fund, a new grant, a new subsidies. If you're looking in your country, in Europe. So knowing all of that and understanding what's at stake is really difficult and requires quite a bit of attention on your side. Public funding are matching investments. So they are not just to build companies, but they are usually matching private funding. And you cannot rely only on public funding to grow your company. I usually advise, even if some rules are that public funding can go up to 50% of your initial funding, I wouldn't advise to count on more than 25%. And as usual, when it comes to funding, try to be pessimistic. Lots of implicit requirements that are not written in the application guidelines. Some of them, yes, but some others, no. There are usually cultural criteria on the headquarters, the workforce location, where the taxes are paid, on the ROI. So this is implicit, ROI, company size. The effective control is also most of the time implicit, but this is where the politics are at hand. They don't want to give money to studios that are owned by foreign entities. And also lots of additional politics elements, social, environmental and social goals, sovereignty issues, violence, sex, etc. So you need to be able to navigate those obstacles. So what makes a strong ecosystem? In Europe, we have lots of, we have an excellent education system in several countries coming from the cinema industry. We have strong game developer associations, both national and regional. We have in some countries several private investors, not enough compared to Asia and US. Hopefully this will grow in the future, but that's definitely a part of a strong ecosystem. If you have a look at like Turkey or Nordics, in the Nordics, people who made Supercell, King, who sold those companies, they are reinvesting, they are creating funds, they are reinvesting as business angels in their own companies, and this makes the Nordics one of the best places to build, especially a mobile studio. But yeah, having rich entrepreneurs from a specific sector reinvest in that sector is super important to build a rich ecosystem. Public and tax incentives. And support expert. When building a studio, usually you put a developer, an artist, a game designer, and that's it. You have basically a core team. But if you want to grow, and especially if you want to go above the ceiling of an very indie studio, let's say if you want to start growing above 20, 25 people, then you need to have strong support experts, so IP lawyers, business lawyers, financial officers. You need to have also dedicated accountants who know the game industry, maybe HR. So game industry is quite specific, and if you work with an expert who didn't work with the game industry before, they can really kill your business plan. They can spend lots of time to hire and be not efficient. So having a network of support experts will be super important to grow our companies, indie companies, above a certain size. So I made a little map using like a scoring card to check where in Europe are the game ecosystems the strongest. Belgium is green. Belgium, France, Germany, UK is very good, and the Nordics as good as well. It's starting to develop, it's starting to be really solid in Spain, Italy, Poland as well. The green, the light bluish area are actually more and more Eastern Europe countries. So you start to have clusters, you're starting to have local game dev associations, no public funding yet, but I mean that would be a great place to, for example, in Ukraine or Romania, the biggest companies outsourced some of their production over there. So you have already a bit of expertise. What remains is people who are able to create those companies, create in-house productions, and really build the ecosystem. And the race is traces. Obviously, as a studio, I would strongly advise you not to deal with Russian publishers right now. This can be difficult. But yeah, as you can see, Europe has lots of great places to build studios and find outsource partners. So if I summarize, Europe weaknesses and opportunities. So Europe private funding is very small. We have no track records. If you want to invest in a sector, you usually need from 5 to 10 years of track record on how the companies perform. And we don't have lots of that right now. It's very difficult to have statistics on the exact number of studios and people working in the game industry per country. Too few specialized funds, and especially a gap funding on the B series, which means that if you need 10 to 25 millions, getting this kind of money is really difficult right now. More difficult than for tech industry, for example. Lack of business profiles for indies. Public funding are very heterogeneous and it changes all the time. We are pushing with my partners at Spielfabrik for the co-production schemes, but right now it's still which is very useful and usual in the cinema industry, but in the game industry, this is still very much more a concept. AA Studios have been raided by Chinese and US funds. I think this is a cycle. People who sold their company, if they still have the energy, either they could create a fund or recreate a new studio. But right now, if you have a look at the mid-sized studios in Europe, this is there is only I would say maybe less than 20 of them. So that's a very small number. Public funding focuses on culture and innovation rather than growth. So that's an issue because if you want to grow at one point, you need a different kind of funding. And this is more like a technical wish on my side. We don't have any single European platform or middleware. Unity, Unreal, lots of database platforms. All of those are based in the US. And the biggest studios, for example, Ubisoft, have a handful of engines. But I mean, at one point, even if tools such as Unreal are very powerful and actually quite cheap compared to what they bring, this will be a dependency that we have with the US. Brexit. That's sad. But lots of opportunities on the European funding, strong public funding for indies, which means that we have lots of creativity, lots of new productions, and actually creating your indie studio really teaches you to build a company, which maybe will fail once or twice, but I mean, this is a super useful skill to have. Very efficient local communities, and more events, such as this one. Top-tier schools. A growing awareness on sovereignty stakes, which means that if you pitch public funding, this is something that you can agitate in front of their nose, because I think there is really this is getting really important for Europe to be able to keep their own blood and promising companies. More and more support specialists, new funds. Hopefully more and more starting next year. In France, we have 6 dedicated funds. In Europe, probably less than 20. But, I mean, it's growing. New financing instruments, co-production, revenue-based financing, especially for the mobile industry. A growing pressure on monopolies, which means that today we are all we are all giving Steam, Google, and Apple 30% of our revenues. And this is a huge anomaly in the distribution scheme. So at one point, they will need, hopefully, they will need to reduce their margin. A new wave of AA Studio. And Europe, I believe, is less exposed than the US in case of a commercial conflict with China. Actually, China doesn't invest less and less in the US, and which is why they are investing a lot in Europe. And I mean, even if it's Asian money and non-European money, as a studio, you need to take whatever you can. So yes, take it for as long as it's available. So yeah, it's not that simple. Actually, a quick pitch on Indie Plaza that we made with my partners at Indie Plaza at Split Fabric. So today we listed more than 600 funding sources in Europe, private and public money, and that's not counting the publishers. Many of them are unknown, and it makes the research very difficult. You need to go on hundreds of websites to not understand if the funds are still alive or not, and how to best reach them. So yeah, we are building Indie Plaza, which is supposed to be, so it's funded by the European Commission. So it's a general interest project. It's intended to be a one-stop shop for the European indies to find funding sources and support experts. So it will be a 3 years project. We are opening the beta. There will be a flash code at the end if you want to try out the site, and you're welcome to give your feedback. For the market, I wanted to leave this to leave you a few. I mean, the funding elements that I provide are very general. I wanted to give you a bit of a highlight on what is the market in 2023 and what will be the impacts for you. So 4 takeaways. First, no one will finance your prototype. I'm sorry. You need to finance it yourself. Why? So at the bare minimum, you should be able to fund your prototype yourself before going to see a publisher. This is, the more games are out there, the longer the publisher will wait to take the risk, and you will eat your equity money like that. So yeah, having a prototype is the minimum to show to every specialized actor around. That includes private funds, and you need to be able to do that yourself. Your own equity is the measure of risk you're willing to take and your capacity to convince others. Usually a pitch deck that you will do, the first public of your pitch deck will be your future associates. And finding the right ones is really super important in the long term. Most publishers sign after a vertical slice, especially if you haven't shipped a game before. In terms of money, always have 6 months of runway, because getting money, and actually I'm hearing horror stories with publishers spending close to 1 year to sign a deal. So if you have one year of runway is the best. 6 months, you're entering the red zone. So this is definitely something that you need to worry. And I know that this is exhausting because as an indie studio, you feel like you're always looking for money, and that's true, which is why you should make a great game and sell lots of it. Second takeaway, be massively data-oriented. So when you're making your market study, do it at the beginning when you launch your project, and you need to be honest with yourself. Which means that when you take comparables, you need also to have a look at games that failed and understand how to not be like them. So I'm very surprised because almost every week I see pitches from studios, and they are starting to compare with other games. Usually it's only the most successful one. So yeah, taking games that fail is important, but also expect that question from the investors: what is the size of your target audience? So that's what we call the total addressable market. So okay, is it 1 million? Is it 10 million people? Is it 50 million? Is it 100K? Today, if you're building a narrative game in pixel art, at best you will sell 50K copies. So at 20K, at 20 euros a game, you're looking from a production that will be that should not cost more than 500K. And that's honestly, that's only a way to sustain a 5 people company for 2 years. So yeah, you should know exactly the size of your audience. And the second question would be, how do you reach that audience? Especially if you're making a mobile game, you will have user acquisition stakes. And this will be, especially if you are pitching to venture capital, the way to reach your audience will be the weak point in your pitch usually. At the end, the question is, would you lend money to yourself? If you would not be ready to invest, like maybe not put your house in mortgage, but you're usually when you're building a company, you bring your own time, which is very valuable. But at one moment, and this will be important when you start to build the associate pact, is that you need to estimate the level of financial risk that you're willing to take, because if you are not convinced that you would be able to take it, you will not manage to convince the investors. Third takeaway, understand your USPs, unique selling points. So with 2,000 titles a week, only a minority of titles get published. I don't know, maybe it's 3%, 5%, but I mean, being published, even by a very small publisher, is already a success. You need to understand what makes your game and team unique. So is it your experience? Is it the way that you shipped game before? Is it that you have a great game that is an instant seller when you give the tagline? So you need, with so many games out there, I mean, what is important is really to find the game that will, publishing a game is very risky nowadays. So you need to find the game that will be not like the others. And also, when you're a studio, usually you compare yourself to the existing productions. Publishers have a view in the future. They try to define what will be the market 2 years or 3 years from now, which means that they have usually a different window, and you need to be able to peer through that window. Is your audience aligned with your USPs? You're not making a game for yourself. Hopefully you will like it as well, but you need to make a game for a specific audience, understand the size, how to reach them, and also so this is yeah, that's what we call the persona analysis, but yeah, that is really something that you will learn to understand especially when you make a community-based development. But yes, finding this kind of alignment will provide you what we call the conversion that will be much higher than if you don't know where to look. So yeah, have a research ready for your audience. A quick word on your audience. I know that now lots of indie studios have a look at their wishlist numbers, and if you don't know your audience, the wishlist is not the end result. The end result is to convert people and have them buy your game. So I'm seeing lots of studios have in mind a certain conversion rate on the wishlist, and they are actually extremely disappointed when the game is out, and this means that they didn't manage to understand their audience. And the result can really vary by a factor of 10. So let's say you would expect 20% of your wishlist number to convert, and it can be really 3%, which means that all of that should not be a surprise. You should be able to understand your audience from the moment you're starting to push your Steam page out there. Also, what is the expected ROI, return on investment, of your project from an investor's point of view? You expect money, you need to be able to show like how much money you will bring back in 2 years, 5 years, and what is the interval of certitude of your computation. So usually when you start to discuss with the investor, they might not agree on the figures, but you need to be very explicit on your assumptions. And that way the investor will understand, as a studio, you should be able to pivot if things doesn't go well. But having a look at how you built your assumption will be a very interesting dialogue with the publisher. Takeaway 4, stay light and agile, especially in 2023. So right now, the market is dominated by the games that are at least one of those, big games, mobile games, multiplayer, game as a service, free-to-play, or games with a systemic gameplay. So if you're not one of those, and you still want to break even and make a living out of it, you have to keep a very light cost structure, small core teams, and recruit, hire people only when you feel overwhelmed or if you feel that you're doing shit on a given vertical. So keep a very light cost structure for as long as possible. Be community-driven to understand who you're selling your game with, where do they come from, use the UTM from Steam, go on the forums of similar games, etc. have a very tight roadmap, because if you start hiring people, a 3 months delay means that you will need to pay everyone 3 months more. So this seems obvious, but if you have a big cost structure, the pressure increases very fast. And that's it. All of that will really drastically increase your survivability, and hopefully you will make it. So you have the flash code for Indie Plaza, and I'm done with the presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Stéphane. It was very insightful, and there's a lot to digest here. So I see some more people have arrived since we first presented. I'm gonna go with a few questions, but at any point, if anyone has a question, raise your hand, and our good friend here over there is going to bring the microphone to you. Just make sure you don't hang on to the microphone for too long, because maybe others might have some questions. So my first question, Stéphane, would be about your current job at Hawkswell Studio. So you're a CFO there, and that is an important job in the game studio. Obviously, not everyone can afford having a CFO, but can you explain a bit more about what that work as a CFO is, and when is it important for a studio to kind of think we should get someone like that?
Okay, that's a very good question. Actually, I shouldn't be in Hawkswell. I think the studio at 40 is still too small for to get a full-fledged CFO. I have a project management career before me, so before I entered Hawkswell. So actually, that I'm CFO only 30% of my time. But yeah, basically, I think you can start to afford a CFO at 80 to 100 people. When you start to have also complex financing structure. So what does a CFO do? Usually studio, when you create a company, you need an accountant. And the way I like to phrase it is that an accountant will be, they need to reflect your past accurately. So they need to be very precise. They need to follow international accounting rules, but they will not. It's a very strict job with strict constraints. And the accountants are not on board. You will usually pay between 300 and 1K a month to be able to have your own accountant. A CFO will help you look in the future. They will help you build your business plan. So we manage at Hawkswell, we manage a horizon of close to 10 years to understand where we steer. And obviously, the closer you get from the present time, the more precise you need to be. So you really need to have a flashlight to show the various scenarios to the founders of the studio. So it's really, you look into the future, you build financial models to understand how many games you need to have, how many copies you need to sell, how you will finance those copies at any moment. So the business plan and the financing plan, and be able to know when to leverage for a given instrument is really our primary job. The second one would be to have a hand on all the money-related process in the company. So that would be the procurement process, if you need to hire freelancers, if you need to hire outsourcing companies. So that's really, every time money comes in or out, you need to be in those processes and understand where is the risk. So actually, a CFO is really a risk manager for a small company. Financial risk is the most obvious, but we have also a legal risk to consider, because if you breach a regulation, then it will cost your company money. If you fail certain regulatory requirements to get funding, you can lose that funding. So yeah, you need to have a hand on those risks as well. And the last one, but usually this is more tackled by the producing part, you need to understand how the money is allocated within the company. So you need to have a critical view on the size of your teams, the size of the speed at which you're hiring. So you need to be able to have a long-term and very fuzzy vision that you need to be very flexible with, but also be able to deep dive in the nitty-gritty of everyday life to make sure that the invoices are paid on time, that the money is not wasted. So you might have, for a studio that have a bit more cash on hand, you might want to optimize your treasury. maybe make some investments on your own. And obviously, the more the company grows, the more you need to work with specialized bankers. So usually, I'm not an accounting expert. I'm not a structured banker expert, but I know how. I'm not a legal expert, but I know how to work with all those kind of people to manage the risk for the company.
So one of the things you've mentioned that has a rather important impact on finding a publisher or public funding more specifically is intellectual property. So what makes an actual IP that people, that publishers, that public funds are going to want to stand behind, and what are the markers that studios should be focused on to really define it in an effective way?
That's a very good question, because actually an IP is basically worthless until the game is out. And I think most people who create a game will create their IP. One of the issues, so yeah, the valuation of an IP, you have several ways to evaluate a company, to evaluate an IP. It can be either the money that you invested in to create this IP, but yes, usually, until the game is out, the valuation of an IP is something, and even of a company, is something that is very tricky to calculate. One of the issues I see with the IP creation, I think that if there are narrative designers in the room, they will understand that very well. I think the game industry was really built by developers and game designers. And building an IP that is powerful enough to sustain, let's say, several games, possibly a transition to transmedia, making series, board games, books, whatever. Having an IP that can sustain this kind of development requires very specific elements. And I think so far, usually you have a prototype, a working prototype, so you have the gameplay. And I know many of my friends who are narrative designers, they were called at the end of a production to say, okay, we need convincing characters, we need a story, so can you please fix that? And usually it's very late. If you have the example of Riot, they created the whole lore of League of Legends very far in the whole process of the company, and which is why I think this is still a weak point of the IP, even if it's getting better. But because at the beginning, they didn't even know the importance of having a narrative designer, a world builder, and an IP builder. So I think this is a very new knowledge for the company. We are starting to see small companies that create IPs that are very knowledgeable in creating worlds. Actually, that would be very similar to the US showrunners in the series industry. So yeah, building an IP is something that is tricky, that should be taken into consideration as early as possible. But don't expect a big valuation unless the game is out there, because it will be correlated to the success of your game.
Okay, we have about 4 minutes for more questions from the public. So don't hesitate. Show your hands up. Yes, there's someone over there. I don't see you very well with the light in my face.
Yep, thank you. Thank you for your speech. It was really relevant. It was great. Thank you. So my question was more about like the publishers, you know. So there is like the well-known publishers and the less-known publishers. What about how to know to go to the good publishers? Because there is some publishers, you heard of indies that have like bad situations with some publishers and so on. So I don't know if you have some hint or maybe clues about those publishers, how to know if you can have like a good relation, if they have a good relationships. I don't know if you have like a website with a publisher ranking or so on. I don't know, but yeah.
That's a good point. Actually, I think one of the things we have in mind for Indie Plaza is maybe build a platform where a studio could meet publishers. And as I said, well-known publishers will receive more than 20 or 30 pitches a day, so that's really difficult. And one of the things they complain a lot is that even if they have a website where they say exactly their thesis of investment, people try out and they send their pitch. They say, okay, an email is free, and they really broadcast. But publishers, and actually that's the case for many investors, they share private networks. They discuss with each other, and usually if you have a shitty project, this will get known pretty fast. So really, you need to make your due diligence on the publishers. I prefer to send less pitches to less publishers, but you need, it's like when applying for a job, you need to understand their track record, you need to understand, does your game fit their editorial line? You need to try to reverse engineer the budget of the games they funded. Are they homogeneous with what you're proposing as well? Maybe you have successful publishers that start to grow and might want to, one way you could try out something is that you see a publisher that makes bigger and bigger games. So in that case, you can start, if you have a bigger budget, then it might be interesting to try to aim to be the first with second-tier publisher than the smallest game with first-tier publishers. So yeah, that boils down to your due diligence, having a look at their portfolio. You have a very good platform that was built 2 years ago, which is called VG Insights, which was made by a friend. They basically scrap Steam every day, but the UI is really top-notch, and you can have lots of publishers and their whole portfolio, their sales, the release dates, the profile of Steam players, and this will be very easy to make your due diligence on publishers. And also, what I said, you need to meet them in person. This is very much a relationship job. And as I said, publisher most of the time will sign people that they know, that they met, that they followed also in time, because this is also a trust matter.
So I'm afraid we're actually running out of time for more questions. So a big thank you and big warm of applause, please, for Stéphane for his speech.